Hello and welcome to UnLevel 2021, the conference by Optmyzr. We've got a great lineup for you today, so be sure to stick around for all the sessions. We've got John Lee from Microsoft, who's going to give us the closing keynote, and we also have sessions from Nava Hopkins, Aaron Levy, and Andrew Locke, who are going to talk to you about unleveling the playing field in your favor when more and more stuff in PPC is becoming automated. They're going to cover how to manage shopping campaigns, search campaigns, how to build audiences, and how to really package it all together to have the best results you've ever had. And along the way, we'll also talk a little bit about how Optmyzr can help you implement these strategies. And in fact, we have a whole separate track for that in the afternoon. So be sure to check out those sessions as well. For myself, what I want to talk about is unleveling the playing field and really talk about the biggest mind shift that we're going to have to go through in PPC management. Myself, I've been doing PPC since about 1998, so it's been a really long time. And it's been fairly consistent in how we manage things, but I think that's coming to a change, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. So my name is Fred Vallaeys. I'm one of the 3 co-founders here at Optmyzr. Before that, I was Google's AdWords evangelist, was involved in creating the AdWords editor, now called the Ads editor, of course. I was involved in the acquisition of Urchin, which is nowadays called Google Analytics, was involved in building conversion tracking, quality score. So did a lot of cool stuff at Google, but now I get to do a lot of cool stuff at Optmyzr and really figure out ways to make PPC management more streamlined, more efficient. And again, really want to thank you for joining us for the conference today. And also, I know many of you watching have engaged with our PPC Town Hall, which we do every 2 weeks. So thank you for watching that as well. And I want to welcome you on behalf of the whole team here at Optmyzr. There's more than 50 of us, and we're all super excited that you're watching. And for those of you who are clients, thank you very much, of course, for that as well. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the 3 things that worry me in PPC today. And I'm going to make these slides a little bit bigger here. There we go. So you can see more of the slide and less of me. But yeah, fundamentally, there's really 3 things that have changed in PPC that could be considered somewhat worrisome. Number 1 is the ad platforms will continue to automate, right? It's not a question of like, how long is this automation going to last? Is there going to be more of it? It's just, it's this wave. It's going to continue. And we just have to figure out our place in the world where there is more automation. And why is this happening? Well, obviously, because we can. Moore's law, which you've all heard about, basically says that computing power doubles roughly every 2 years. And so if you think about artificial intelligence having been invented in roughly the 1950s, and if you consider how many times computing power has doubled since then, it's really only since the early 2000s that we've seen that doubling stack up on this chart here and be more than just a blip. And now, of course, in 2020, 2021, 2022, I mean, it's doubling again. And every time we double on something that's already quite good, it's just making it that much more impactful. And so for that reason, Google's just going to continue doing this because the results work and the computing power is there to facilitate this wave. Now, it also happens because it creates value. And if you think back to artificial intelligence and automation in PPC, it really harks back to the days of quality score. And that was fairly early on. And quality score drives a lot of value. In fact, I think it's the one thing that made Google as successful as it is today. They were obviously an ad platform, but the reason that so much money started going through the ads from Google was that they prioritized quality score. They prioritized relevance. All of a sudden, they figured out how to make ads on the internet relevant, clickable, and they were charging people, advertisers, on a cost per click basis, right? And so with quality score, its job is to predict the probability of somebody clicking. That is done through machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so it's using the wisdom of the crowds and all the sorts of factors and the data that Google has. And data, by the way, is the other big wave here. So computing power has gained tremendously, but also the amount of data that Google has access to do something useful with, right? If they just had a lot of machine power, computing power, but not a lot of data, they really couldn't do that much. But it's when you put those 2 together that amazing things happen. And quality score obviously provides value for advertisers because it means that we can pay less for clicks if we have a higher relevance. And for Google, it means they're better able to monetize every time an advertiser says they want to show an ad on a search results page or on the Google Display Network. And the other reason that this is going to continue to happen is because, frankly, Google Ads is not easy. right? And so this is a little graph that we found on Shopify, but basically it's saying there's 70 million signals that all have to be analyzed within 100 milliseconds for every single auction. And so Google's looking at all of these inputs around the auction, like where's the user based? What have they searched in the past? What time of day is it? All of these factors. And based on that, a probability is a sign of a conversion. We could not, as humans, manage this ourselves. And in fact, if you think about Optmyzr, many of the recommendations and the optimizations that we suggest process over a gigabyte worth of ads data for us to run through the process, through the model, to give you the suggestions that we think are the best for you. So it just would be very, very difficult to replicate that manually. And then the other factor is that advertisers actually tend to like automations. And this is a study we did from Optmyzr data, but we basically looked at how many advertisers had installed RSAs, responsive search ads. These are a more automated way of doing ads where you just provide the headlines and the description lines, and Google's system puts them together based on what it thinks will be the most relevant clickable ad for that particular user in that particular auction. Well, so it turns out 75% of our users have at some point tried RSAs. And by the way, if you haven't, we have a great tool that makes it super fast to build them. But of the 75% who tried it, only a teeny tiny fraction, 0.3%, stopped using them. Okay, so that tells me advertisers turn them on in large numbers, and very few advertisers turn them off. So either advertisers are lazy or RSAs are by and large working, right? And so it's probably the second. If advertisers were lazy and you actually saw really bad results from RSAs, that laziness would be out the window and people would turn off these ads because they don't want to waste money, right? So this tells me that automation is working. Now, the second truth in the changing world is that data keeps being taken away. And we've all seen this, and we're all frustrated by this, right? So because of privacy, and privacy truly being a big driver of this, but search query data, search terms are being taken away from us. This was in September of 2020. Google reduced significantly the amount of search terms that we could see in the reports. And there you got Will Reynolds, who's saying that for him, his visibility was down from 98 to 78% overnight. There was Matt Umbro from Hennepin Marketing, who did the research that you see on the right, saying that in one account, it went from 4% of search terms being hidden to 37%. Another account, 3% to 33%, right? So these are huge numbers of search terms and cost associated with them that's no longer visible. So how do you make good decisions? By the way, I'm going to share a few scripts throughout. I do a lot of scripting. So if you want to run this analysis for yourself very easily, the script right there is on that URL on the bottom. So be sure to go and grab that. Okay, so the other reason that data is being taken away is actually one of the fundamentals of machine learning. So the weird thing about machine learning is that you can get it to make predictions and tell you things, but it's much harder for that system to say why it made a certain decision, right? So we all know you can train a model to find pictures of cats, and then you show it pictures of cats, and it says, okay, this is a cat. Yes, this is not a cat because it's a dog. Right? But then if you say, well, explain to me, why did you not think this was a cat? It can't really tell you. Machine learning is fairly opaque in that manner. And so that's another reason, because the more machine learning comes into our worlds, the harder it becomes for these systems to also tell us what's happening. So there's less data for us to really make adjustments with. And then, at the end of the day, the human intuition still really does matter, because here's an example that Google had published at one point, which says that when it comes to close variants, and close variants obviously being when an exact match keyword is no longer exact, but they said that flower arrangement as a keyword was fundamentally the same meaning as arranging flowers. To me, that's not at all the same meaning. Flower arrangement, that sounds to me like someone's looking to spend money with a florist to buy a floral arrangement. Arranging flowers, on the other hand, that sounds to me like someone who's looking for a video on YouTube on how to do it themselves and not necessarily spend money on it, right? So that's why we actually should insist to still have some control and still get some of the data to make decisions with. And by the way, I'll share with you how you can look at close variants and start to automate those for your benefit to unlevel the playing field. And then the third reality is that advertiser controls are being reduced. I love this picture of a self-driving car. Notice there's no gas pedal, there's no brake, there's no steering wheel. And when Google was building self-driving cars, that is what they wanted to build, because they said The cars drive themselves. Like, what's the point of having a steering wheel? As a safety blanket so that the user feels good? Obviously, when they proposed not having the steering wheel, not having the brake, a lot of people said, no, we need those things, right? Advertisers still want those controls, even though the technology is at a point where those controls may not truly be necessary. Right, and when we put that in terms of PPC and not self-driving cars, one thing that we saw was that phrase match is absorbing modified broad. So we're fundamentally losing a keyword match type. That is a reduction of the controls that we have. Now, at some level, and we did a study on this, but at some level, I think we are somewhat to blame for that keyword match type going away, because a lot of advertisers used it not as it was intended by Google. I was actually still at Google. I was working on this launch itself. And broad match modified was really about fixing this whole problem, and changing one of the words in the keyword would have a drastic change to what it meant, right? If you sell Xbox games and Google says, well, it's a broad match keyword. So if it's Xbox games, maybe we could match it to Nintendo or Switch games or PlayStation games, because they're still video games. It's still kind of the same thing. But if you only sell Xbox games, changing Xbox to PlayStation is kind of a big deal. If you're GameStop and you sell all the games, then that might be perfectly fine, because you can still meet the demand and you can still satisfy that user's needs. So we did a study and we noticed that 89% of advertisers we looked at used the broad match modified keywords. 55% of advertisers use only full BMM, where they put a plus in front of every single word. Google didn't want you to put a plus in front of every word. They wanted you to put a plus in front of the words that should not be changed, right? So, and then 95% of all the BMM keywords we saw were full BMM, again, with a plus in front of every single word. Only 5% of the keywords that we saw were partial BMMs, and that was what Google wanted advertisers to do. But if advertisers weren't doing it, then Google said, well, okay, we're not going to lose much by switching everyone over to phrase match and make phrase match operate a little bit differently. So that's what they did, right? So we all have to be very careful about how we use the systems Google gives us, because if we don't use them as intended, then Google might take that away. Now, the other reason that Google might be taking away controls is that it is actually easier to do machine learning and automation when things are very nicely structured. And to bring it back to the example of the self-driving car, that self-driving car is going to have a much easier time driving the road on the left, where it's very straight, the lines are nicely painted, whereas the road on the right side is a little bit messy. It's got potholes, the markings are broken, right? Automation thrives in a predictable environment. The more controls Google gives to us, the more we're going to make settings that are not quite as predictable for the machine, right? So that is another incentive for Google to kind of reduce the controls that they give to us. And so when you equate that back to PPC, the nice straight road is like these full automations, like smart shopping campaigns, app campaigns, performance max campaigns. Something on the right side, these are all the manual campaigns where we have weird naming conventions, we set different kinds of bids, maybe we don't communicate conversion value that well, so we make all of these mistakes that make automation really hard. Now, we have more automation, and that's a given. There's going to be less data, and there's going to be fewer controls. So what does that give us? Well, if you ask Google, they say it's advertising that works for everyone. This is actually a slide they announced, or they presented at Google Marketing Live a couple of years ago when talking about automation. And it makes sense. It makes advertising easier for PPC novices, for people who don't have a full-time job doing digital marketing, right? But if you're listening to this, if you're a PPC expert, this is actually making your life harder in a way. It's changing how you have to do things, right? And that's what we want to talk about. So to win at PPC, it really is time for a dramatic shift because of all these three factors that are happening with Google. So let's take a look at that. So it turns out that automation is actually better when you bring humans into the mix. And to give you an example of that, Garry Kasparov, the reigning world champion at chess, was challenged by IBM's Deep Blue chess playing computer, and he lost in that match. However, he started doing some research and he found that if you had a supercomputer, it was no match for a strong human player using a relatively weak laptop. And that was interesting, right? So computers are good at computing, hence their name, but humans are really good at strategy. So if you put those two together versus a supercomputer who has to do everything, the human with the relatively weak laptop actually wins. Now think about yourselves. You're up in PPC against Google's supercomputer. And you probably have a mediocre laptop of some sort. Even if it's a really good one, it's not a supercomputer. But you got your laptop, you got your PPC strategy. Put those two together, you can actually beat the supercomputer. Now, I wrote a book about this. It's called Digital Marketing in an AI World. And I have a section in that book that talks about what are the roles that humans should play in ways of working together with technology. And so that first role is the human as a PPC doctor, the human as the PPC pilot, and finally the human as the PPC teacher. So let me give you examples of each of these. So when it comes to a PPC doctor, think about doctors. One of the things they do is when they prescribe medication, they think about interactions that might not be highly desirable. And so in PPC, we have a lot of choices of tools and technologies to deploy for our strategies, but some of these combinations don't work well, right? We've all heard from Google, hey, go and do smart bidding. But if you do smart bidding without having certain preconditions met, smart bidding is not going to work really well. And so, for example, if you do last click attribution as your measurement type and you do smart bidding, that's really bad, because what happens is it's going to stop paying attention to everything at the upper stages of the funnel. And nowadays, by the way, we talk much more about the customer journey, but I think this funnel is just a much easier representation for roughly the same thing, right? And so if you do last click attribution, all the weight goes to the last thing the user searched. No weight goes to the early interactions the user has. So the smart bidding computer model is going to say, well, then let's stop bidding for the things early in that life stage of the customer being on their journey, right? And so you would say, well, aren't there more interesting things for me to do than worry about my attribution models? Well, let me give you a specific example. If you sell sneakers, right, humans will intuitively realize that upper funnel keywords like sneakers are very useful for someone who sells sneakers. However, most consumers, when they look for sneakers, they start with looking for something generic, like the keyword sneakers, but then they get more specific and they eventually type in Ultra Boost 2021 in black, right? So they type in a color, a size, a type of model, a specific brand, and now that's what they search, and then they convert. In last click attribution, that's what gets the value. Sneakers gets no value. And smart bidding is stupid. It says smart in the name, but it's not actually smart enough to know that, this was a journey. If you use last click attribution and you put all the weight on the final thing, then the upper funnel gets no activity, and you're actually going to narrow your upper funnel, and you're going to start losing conversions because of that. Right. And so PPC is actually really hard again. It's just like, look at how many types of different bid management, automated bid management there are, and look at the ways these interact with different types of bid adjustments. Most bid adjustments get ignored when you do automated bidding, but not all of them. Some of them actually do work together and in unusual ways. So this is a chart we have available on the Optmyzr website. I didn't put the URL there, but we can share that with you if you want it. So anyway, it's about understanding these interactions, like how do you put things together? Now, the PPC pilot, think of a pilot. The average pilot flies a plane, I've heard, about 11 minutes in a whole flight. That is not a lot of time flying, but they need to monitor systems, right? They need to make sure that the plane has the right inputs to fly itself to where it needs to go. Now, if you told the pilot, well, some of the gauges are in the front of the plane, but you also have to run to the back of the plane to look at some other systems, and then you have to go out to each side of the plane to look at the wings and see if the engines are running, like that'd be horrible, right? You couldn't fly a plane. You need all your controls in one place. Sometimes Google is a little bit like controls are all over, or they're not nicely brought together. So the specific example here is if you're going to do experiments, drafting experiments from Google, it's actually really difficult to stay on top of all the experiments you're doing across a single account, and even more so across a multitude of accounts if you're an agency. So, I built a spreadsheet that comes out of a script. You can see the URL right there, but it basically puts all of your experiments on a single dashboard. It puts the numbers right there, so you don't even have to click into the experiment to know how many clicks and conversions you've had in the experiment versus the control. And you can use this one place to make all your decisions. As a PPC pilot, think about ways that you can stay on top of the machine, that you can monitor it so that you have more control and can make sure it's actually doing what you wanted it to do. And then the last one is the human as the PPC teacher, right? And this is really about, well, first of all, machine learning as the name says, it's learning, right? So it needs a teacher to teach it what to do. Now, oftentimes, I think us as humans, we teach incomplete information to the machines, and that's really detrimental. Now, when I was working at Google, I gave this presentation quite frequently, which was about the 10 rules of innovation at the company. And one of them was to share all information. And the idea was, we've hired lots of smart people at Google, okay? And if you give them all the same information and you tell them what the goals are, they will independently arrive at more or less the same solution. They will help the company move in the right direction. But if you don't give them all the information, then how can you expect them to make good decisions, or at least consistent decisions? It's the same with machine learning. If you don't give the right inputs to the machines, like what is a conversion truly mean to me? A lot of people say if somebody fills out a form, that's a conversion. I got a lead, right? But is that really a conversion? Do you just want people to fill out forms on your site, or do you want them to fill out the form, then talk to your sales team, and then convert, and then become a high lifetime value customer for a long time, right? So think about what information are you sharing with these machines, because these machines are like your best account managers, but they need complete information to do a good job and help you achieve your goals. Now, since I wrote the book, there are sort of two new principles that I thought about. Well, the first one is we really have to make a super dramatic shift. And this is kind of the fundamental piece about the biggest mind shift in PPC history. So in the old days of PPC, to manage PPC, we had to think about keywords, we had to think about bid adjustments, we had to think about ads, we had to think about exclusions, like everything you see in the circle. These were all the details that we had to handle, right? And we handled these details because we were trying to achieve leads, sales, and signups, which would eventually give us paying clients, more profits, more revenue. But nowadays, we kind of have to flip it upside down, I think, because the thing on the right, Google promises to automate, and that's only going to continue to be more automated. But the more that we can think about, well, at the edges of this bubble of everything we used to manage, what kind of inputs can we give to that system to make it do a better job? And in figuring that out, that is how you unlevel the playing field, right? So what is the true value that you're going after? If you can communicate that, if you can manage your feed when you're doing shopping ads, right? Because shopping ads are automated. There's no ads that you create. It all comes from your shopping feed, right? So let's think about manipulating the shopping feed. Let's think about manipulating conversion values. Let's think about anything we can do at the periphery of Google Ads to make it make better decisions in its automated ways, and then still layer on top automations where we monitor what those machines are doing. And one of the things we found is you can actually do bid adjustments together with smart bidding. And that's a thing a lot of people don't really realize. Now, the way that works is you can either use something like conversion value rules from Google, or you can just do this yourself. You don't have to wait for Google to do it for you. But what you're saying is, say that you value conversions from a certain place quite highly. So say that you really like conversions when they come from the UK, because for some reason, those turn into good lifetime value customers. Well, instead of just reporting the same value, right? So you get a sale in the UK and you get a sale in the United States. They bought the same amount of stuff, right? So the value that you report is the same. But why not boost the value that you report out of the UK by some amount, say by 20%, 10%, 5%, whatever. The number doesn't matter. But you just say that was actually worth more because now the machine learning system says, oh, that was a better conversion. So let's try to find more of that type of conversion. So it helps you steer the machine in the direction that you think makes the most sense for your business. And so when you think about all this smart bidding and this machine learning, you really got to ask yourself, what are the factors that matter to your business? And then of those factors, which are the ones that you believe Google is already looking at? Those might be fine. But any of the factors that matter to your business that you're not sure Google is looking at, that's what you need to bring back into updating conversion values and figuring out ways to steer the machine and teach the machine about these factors, right? So one classic example is if you sell car batteries and you know that you sell a lot of car batteries on the first frost of the season because car batteries die when it gets really cold, right? Google may not know that, but you do know the forecast. You know it's going to freeze tomorrow. So you're going to have a lot of people coming in looking to buy car batteries. Well, manipulate your targets, your TCPA, your TROAS, increase your budget. Do all of the things that give you the edge because Google probably doesn't know that freezing temperatures matter to your business, but you do. And that unlevels the playing field for you. Now, all of this can be really complicated, really time consuming. And I started to think about that. And I was like, wow, the more we automate, the more work we actually have to do to teach the machine, to monitor it, to stay on top of things. But then it dawned on me that, with all these scripts that I've been writing, this is really automation layering. We're basically saying, let Google and its high-end machine learning do the thing they're really good at. But let me think about little automations that I can put on top of that to make sure the results are better, to rein in Google when it's trying to go too broad on my close variants, for example. And so this is the concept of automation layering. Build your own simple automation based on your strategy and deploy it on top of what Google's doing for you, right? So it's not an either or question. It's a question of, okay, let Google do what it's good at and let me make it a little bit better by putting automation on top. Right? So for example, Google PPC is better with automation layering. We can say smart bidding sets auction time bids. But what if my automation monitors smart bidding for outlier behaviors? Right? It's a very simple automation, but it gives us more confidence in the system when we know that something that we've built is actually looking at it and is telling us if something's not going exactly as expected so that we can take action on that. Now, the other thing I told you about, one of the human roles is that of the pilot. But I was really thinking about the commercial pilot, but then it's like, well, there's also the fighter pilot, right? Like all of us are fundamentally competing against each other for the cheapest clicks, the most conversions. So yeah, we should be thinking about ourselves as fighter pilots. So let me give you a couple of techniques you can use to, again, unlevel the playing field. This is a script, which is a great example of an automation layer, but it's about detecting geo anomalies. So Google has this fantastic script they wrote, and we put it in Optmyzr as well, but it's about the hourly anomaly detector. And so basically says, okay, right now on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, like how many conversions do I expect to have typically based on 8 weeks of historical data? If I'm much below that, send me a quick email to let me know something's wrong. Well, we took that same principle, but we flipped it around and we said, well, we're not going to look at hourly results, but we're going to look at certain geographies. And this became really important in the pandemic world where every location has its own thing going on. Right? I did a lot of travel before the pandemic. And so I would see that, really the world is becoming very homogeneous. Everything's basically the same. I mean, there's variations, but there's a Starbucks in virtually every city you go to. And of course, not that Starbucks is the criteria of a homogeneous world, but like I think we've all seen it. As we travel, things just become much more consistent. But then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden, yeah, there may be a Starbucks in the next city that I'm going to travel to, but I don't know if it's open. I don't know if I can sit inside the restaurant, or I can do takeout, or if the thing is completely shut. And that's really difficult to stay on top of unless you have a little script that looks for geo anomalies. And so it says, well, typically in London, we'd expect this many clicks on a typical Tuesday. Okay, but yesterday we had very few clicks. Okay, now I know. Let me go and take a look at what's happening currently in London because something might be going on that I wasn't aware about and that I can do something about. Now, the second unleveling tactic is finding new search terms, right? So travel obviously saw a huge unexpected rise in searches for cancellations when the pandemic hit, and that's the Google Trends data that shows you that. Now, that's just one example, but like in any industry, there's always new trending keywords. There's keywords that are dropping off. How do you stay on top of that? Well, we built an automation in the rule engine that any Optmyzr user can quickly deploy. It's called New and Declining Search Queries Report. You can set the boundaries on this, by the way. So you can say, okay, if I had a keyword that all of a sudden, or a search term that's producing 100 impressions per week, whereas the previous week it had no impressions, tell me about that, because maybe I need to start thinking about making ads for that new search term that was unexpected. Or tell me about search terms that used to have huge volume, but all of a sudden have dropped off, right? It could be that it drops off because people are no longer searching for it, or it could be something's wrong with my account. But this is a great report because it's going to tell you what are these anomalies at the search term level. Okay, and then the next one is managing multiple targets. Okay, so the as far as managing multiple targets, this is a slide from Google actually. So Google says if you're running smart shopping campaigns, think about your return on ad spend and your margins. Okay, so different products you sell usually have different profitability margins. It might make sense to group them together. So if you have products with a high return on ad spend, or a high margin, if you have price with a high margin, then you can have a lower return on ad spend to break even on those. And so you start grouping your products like this, and now you can actually put them in separate smart campaigns, smart shopping campaigns, or regular shopping campaigns, and you can set different targets for them. And kind of like one of my favorite ways to explain this is like, think of smart shopping as your washing machine at home, right? So the washing machine is the technology that makes you not have to do your laundry. But if you take every single piece of clothing that you own and you put it into the washing machine all together, well, guess what's going to happen? Your colors are going to bleed off onto your whites, and you're going to have like this mediocre bunch of clothes that all end up being the same color, and that's not great, right? That's the same thing with shopping. You have different products with different attributes, different profitabilities. Group those products and then put them in different loads of the washing machine. And in PPC, that means put them in different campaigns with different targets, different budgets, right? But that, again, can be really time consuming. So what we've done in Optmyzr is we have Shopping Campaign Builder 2.0, and we've introduced a feature in there which automatically will group your products based on historical return on ad spend, as well as price points. So we can automatically segment and do all of this hard work for you. And you can even tell us, how many campaigns do you want? Do you want us to split it in 5 campaigns, 10 campaigns? How many products should be in each? And so it makes it really easy to deploy this more advanced strategy from Google, so you're not just getting mediocre results. Now, the next UnLeveling tactic, I really like this one. It's about close variance, right? So close variance, if you remember, means that an exact match keyword no longer has to be exact. So long as Google thinks that something has quote unquote roughly the same meaning, it becomes eligible to be shown. Now, think of this as a circle. In the middle of the circle, you have exact matches where the search term was exactly the same as the keyword that you had. But then that circle expands, and as you go further and further out, the relevance becomes less and less good, right? So it goes from green in terms of relevance to being red in terms of relevance, and not that close anymore. See, here's the problem now. Google gets to decide what is the cutoff for what they consider to be quote unquote same meaning. Like, what is that relevance threshold? They set that. I'm not happy with that. I want to make it more conservative. How do you do that? Well, you do it by monitoring your close variance, but that can be really complicated. Now, we have a rule engine strategy that we built, which will report on all of your close variance. So it will say, okay, if your keyword was exact match, but the search term was not exactly the same as the keyword, then it was considered a close variant. We put that in a report. We show you your exact match keyword. Right next to it, we show you the close variant. And then we have additional functions that allow you to do a calculation that you run on how similar were these things. So you can say if the similarity score according to Optmyzr was still really good, okay, then just put it in a report. Tell me this happened and let me look at it, and then I'll make a decision. But if the Optmyzr calculation says, well, this was a close variant, and according to that calculation, it wasn't even close to the underlying keyword, well, let me be really conservative. The rule engine will automatically make it a negative for you if you want, and then still send you the email and say, okay, well, here's what we made negatives. So it's a more conservative strategy. And again, the power of automation layering and Optmyzr is that you're in control. You choose what to deploy on top of what Google does. Now, the other thing, smart bidding, automated bidding. I think smart bidding is great. It's nobody has more data than Google. Nobody has more engineers dedicated to bid management than Google. But again, the problem is you need to know when you have enough data, when maybe you need to switch between different bid strategies, or you need to look at how your budget is playing into it. There's all these criteria, right? Like I said, the prerequisites for having good smart bidding. Well, Rule Engine is fantastic because we can look at your results, your bid management types, and we can tell you when a manual campaign has enough data to maybe be a good candidate to be automated on bidding. And vice versa, if an automated bidding campaign all of a sudden doesn't have a lot of conversions, maybe you pull it out and you manage it manually for a while to bring back those results that you need to get it to do the best that it possibly can. Again, this is more work, but that's why we're here, right? We are here because we don't just want the automation to run itself. We want to get better results. Now, what's next from Optmyzr? So we're working on a number of really exciting things. On the visual right there, you can see some of the new dashboarding work we're doing. We've obviously launched the new menu system. The UI is getting a refresh. We're refreshing the UI, but we're still making sure everything stays fast, everything works with really big accounts. But we're also working on feed optimization, conversion value optimization, adding more optimization suggestions and making it easier to act on those. In our auditing system, we no longer just tell you what's broken in your account, but we'll give you a much quicker way to fix it right then and right there. We're working on more cross-account optimization. So as you have these walled gardens of Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Facebook, we're doing things like cross-account, multi-account budget management, multi-account reporting, multi-account keywords are coming. So many things that are going to make your life easier. And so those are some of the budget automations as well. Some of the most popular tools we've always had within Optmyzr are the scripts for managing your budgets. Much of that capability is now being transferred into API-based tools. And so a lot of updates are going to be coming to that as well. But thank you again for joining me and the next speakers coming up. So join that keynote track to learn about modern PPC strategies from Aaron, Andrew, Nava, and then John from Microsoft, of course, who's going to do the closing keynote. Join the product track that we have to hear more specific Optmyzr solutions and how we can help you and how we will continue to help you in the years to come. And if you have any questions or want to follow up or want to get a one-on-one demo, our support team is fantastic. They get really good reviews every time we ask. So I hope you have that same experience, but you can get a hold of them at support@optmyzr.com. So thank you again for joining UnLevel 2021. Enjoy the rest of the day.